Howdy folks, this little video shows the first steps in creating a gestural, anatomical, and structured life drawing. First of all, I would like to say thank you to our model Karen Shakira. Her participation in this process was vital to its completion. Our starting point is creating gesture or implied movement of our model's pose, generating proportions and composition on the page. This general layout blocks out the action. The larger curving forms in the figure. I placed in the relative proportion and size of the head to give me a visual base of operation. All of these first parts of the drawing will help push the forms in different yet unified directions. This helps set up the drawing's rhythms. I set in the generic hands and the elbows without much detail, so it will not slow down quick drawing and observation. After positioning for the openings of the top of the rib cage with the clavicles, the collarbones, I place the tubular neck and watch for the proportions. I make many decisions with fixed and modified lines as we progress, with the center line down the sternum. I counter the verticals of the layout with some transverse axis lines that attach to solid skeletal points on the figure, such as the clavicles, the top and the bottom of the pelvis. This will give you a starting point to block out the boxes, egg-like volumes, and plane changes you will soon add to your drawing. With the skeletal gesture somewhat blocked out, I establish a sound platform to anchor the next step of the measurement, the angle sightings and the triangulation, to check, correct, and/or solidify the decisions I have made. It is important to measure and unify the objects and/or body parts that happen to fall on the ground plane. The figure must look balanced and the perspective must be in sync with your point of view. If you line up these rather concrete yet abstract comparisons, it establishes a good base of absolutes to make more comparisons with. Then luckily, the angle sighting from the elbow lines up with the forehead. The plumb line and other angles of measurement help get the pieces working together with the entire composition. This comes out with a right proportional conclusion. Now I am confident enough to where I can move into defining the pivotal skeletal forms I will eventually attach the muscle forms to. Again, I am not too interested in detail as much as creating the illusion of overlapping structural forms to help my organization. Perhaps you can see the positioning of the knees in space with the perspective. The right leg is the load-bearing leg, locked into position, and it turns towards us. The left leg swings away from us, and the box at the head of the femur shows more of its side than its front. Notice also how the angle sights between the kneecaps visually tie them together. At this point, while I am solidifying the skeletal figure, I continue to back up my conclusions with more simple head counts that will either reinforce correct drawing or will help me fix proportional problems. You can also see that the head count points are attached to a vertical plumb line to the right that allows me to place horizontal lines at equal intervals and make sure the forms and gesture are in proportion. At this point, make note of the figure, the skeleton, and the drawing interacting. The constant reinforcement is that the skeleton can become a gestural structure. The figure can be animated and can help bring a stable platform to the implied movement, similar to that of an armature for a sculpture. As I continue, I'm still careful about re-examining the proportions and the horizontal to vertical ratios. Now we move back to the feet and the perspective on and around what the model is standing on. This helps anchor the model's feet to the box and that to the ground plane in the right perspective. We continue to bounce around the composition using a darker line. Bring attention to important pivot points like the hands on the shoulder and the hips, and make sure the figure is in relative proportion. At this point, I'm confident enough to start to really establish the inside planar corners of the pelvis and rib cage. This establishes the outward projecting corner of the box. I also work up the bony span across the pubic area so I may better attach the points of measurement and gesture. This allows for the volume of the leg muscles that would appear later in the process. Now I reinforce the skeleton in simple structural means to focus on the overlapping spatial line quality. This is where the anatomy appears on the surface forms, and it helps show the landmarks where the muscular forms will attach. Note that the left exterior edge of the rib cage doesn't have a dominant line, so it drops into the background, but the defined sternum and or curved inside corner of the rib cage advances towards the viewer. One of the ideas is for the lines and forms to gesturally flow over and around the shoulders, neck, and arms. Now as we move into the torso, I am accenting prominent planes and corners of forms. Compare the various levels of line quality to make sure that the interior and exterior edges of anatomical volumes are either receding or advancing in space. The hand cannot just hang limply on the hip, but should wrap around and over the pelvis and iliac crest. This also includes the bending angular forms of the wrist and the hand wedge. It is time to re-examine the swing and action of the gesture, the beginning moves that influenced all the drawing that followed. First came the curve of the head and neck into the opening at the top of the rib cage. Next, the curve of the spine along the torso. Then the front center line of the abdominal region. Then the long curve for the weight-bearing leg, and finishing with the foot as a platform. This is a completed concept and composition. Note the variation of line quality and readjustment in proportion, gesture, and anatomy. Compare and contrast the results. Note there are small differences because of the process and the camera angles, but the results are solid. The process sound.